So, tell me, Bobby, what exactly is the article about?
The kidnapping of an American citizen.
You think I had something to do with this kidnapping?
I'm not the one you have to convince.
Looks can be deceiving. I am a lover of America, although I was raised to feel very Pakistani. It fell on me to work hard for my family. I left to go west, where I was welcomed with open arms.
You have 20 minutes to convince me that you belong at Underwood Sampson.
In America, I get an equal chance to win. And whether or not you hire me, Jim, I am going to win.
Good answer. Congratulations.
Your expression was amazing.
What exactly do you do at the Underwood?
We help companies to increase their value.
You have a gift for this. A very lucrative gift.
You picked a side after 9/11? I didn't have to. It was picked for me.
Step over here, sir.
So is there a problem?
He's an employee.
Follow me, please.
Have you ever been a member of a terrorist organization? How do you feel about the United States of America?
Agent Ford, I love the United States of America. Violence had wormed its way into my life.
You go down to that office and you do the job you were hired to do.
If you're just an innocent bystander, Chungus, why were you hiding?
You say guilty people hide, so do people who feel hunted.
When you determine where you stand, the color will return to your world.
I don't recognize my own voice anymore. It sounds all fake, like someone who doesn't come from anywhere.
You sound real to me.
You're playing a dangerous game, Chungus.
You're gonna get us both killed. Yes, I'm Pakistani. Yes, I'm Muslim. But that's not all I am.
So Mira, welcome. And I was going to say, since we share a Swahiliized Kapala background, and also a Punjabi background, I should say Namaste, Sat Sri Akal, and Habari Karibu.
All of the three. Blessings and thank you so much. As I've made films now since I was 20 years old, and that's 35 years ago, I've recognized the privilege of inspiration, because it's not often one has this bolt of inspiration. And the inspiration to make Reluctant Fundamentalist came from my first visit to Pakistan, to Lahore in 2004. As a child of modern India, you don't get to go to Pakistan that easily. As many of you know, with the partition of India and into Pakistan and India in 47, there was a real wall and a serious war between the two countries, when in fact, culturally, geographically, and in deep spiritual ways, I really do believe we are one place. But I was not allowed to go there. My father was effectively raised in Lahore before the partition. He went to college, school, law school, everything there. And the Lahoris, the people from Lahore, are like the people from Venice in a certain sense. They're great artists. They're surrounded by painting and music and art and poetry. This wonderful Faiz Ahmed Faiz, a revolutionary poet of Pakistan, was my father's favorite poet, and we grew up in India knowing Faiz's work and knowing the music of Iqbal Bano and Noor Jahan and singers who are now associated, of course, of being Pakistani, but then they were all one India. So to go there in 2004 was a deeply moving and unexpected experience, because living in the United States, as I have been for many years, the notion you have of Pakistan, if you read the newspapers, is just one of drones and hijackings and bearded hysteria, generally speaking. And it is so far from the extraordinary refinement that I encountered, but also its immense largesse of warmth and hospitality, and people just sweeping me off and showing me their homes and showing me their markets and taking care of me, as a complete, a known stranger, but still a stranger. And So that was the first inspiration, is to make something contemporary about this world, this Pakistan that we don't know about. And it was only 6 months after being there that I happened to read Mohsin Hamid's brilliant book, which had not yet been published, The Reluctant Fundamentalist, which then later became a bestseller, but that happened only after I had asked him whether I could make the film of it. Because in that book was not only this springboard, because a director looks at books, at least I do, as springboards of my imagination, not just every page being faithful to the movie medium, because the medium of movies is very different from literature. So you have to understand in a story that you want to bring to it a certain thing. For instance, the Pakistani family in our film is a very engaged, lively universe. You know, Changez, the young protagonist who dreams and loves America, comes from a once rich aristocratic family that now has no money. The father is a poet, but they come from a kind of class, but they don't believe really in America. They don't believe in him going off to join Wall Street and sort of make money. They don't share those values. But of course, a young man is a young man and he wants to find his way. So he comes from that kind of culture. And for me, it was very important to humanize and to enjoy, because that's my culture. I know, to enjoy that, you know. So in fact, Mohsin, we wrote the first 2 drafts of the screenplay in Mohsin, the novelist's father's study in Lahore, and he used to joke with me, and you know, I had put the family, weddings, dance, song, all the stuff I love, and he would say, Mira, what are you doing, making Monsoon Terrorist, you know? and he would laugh, because Monsoon Wedding we all kind of enjoyed. But for me, the humanity, the kind of what this family is, the fact that we are just human beings, but we have certain values and certain idiosyncrasies, were as important to me as any politics or anything. So, but not only did it give me that, this book, but it also gave me a genuine dialogue with America. And this is what I see increasingly just does not exist. In this part of the world, in the movies that we see, in the spin of the media, in all of that, it's always genuinely a one-sided conversation. It's about the American soldiers who go to fight for freedom, who sometimes come back in body bags, and we mourn for them, and we feel that their nobility, but we'll never understand who they fight against, and what is the woman who might have lost her family, her friends, her home, her whole thing in the name of this democracy. So that has irked me forever. You know, I just think if we don't tell our own stories, no one else will tell them. But if we seek to tell our stories just for ourselves, there's no point. We must have a dialogue, we must have a bridge, we must have a way to make us not be the other. Who is the other? To question this idea of who is other, you know. So that's what Mohsin's tale gave me. It was a genuine dialogue between the Changez, the Pakistani character, and Bobby, whom we named Bobby, the American character in the movie, played by Liev Schreiber. But in the book, you see, it was a monologue. The American character never spoke. So that took literally 3 years to adapt the screenplay in an effective, complicated, layered, and hopefully enjoyable way. And then, of course, it took a long time, a lot of difficulty to finance it, because the world is what it is, and movies cost money, and it's not often. And I wanted to make this film very carefully and consciously without censorship, you know. And to look for that kind of money that gives me complete creative freedom is not easy, you know. So that took a while. It took about 1.5 years. But I almost gave up in the middle, but then didn't. And then we had this, and then once I had the cast, once I had the money, even with this extraordinary cast of Kate Hudson and Kiefer Sutherland and Liev Schreiber and Om Puri and big stars from both sides of the world, it still took a lot of convincing to make this movie in the global way that it is made. It's made in 4 continents, and it's made with a lot of finesse, I think, but it costs, but we made it for much less. I was joking at dinner saying the subtitle of my life is poor but free, and that's what it is. So at least I'm very happy in terms of the film, because no one has messed with it, you know, in a way that a lot of studio movies, because I make studio films as well, is always like that, you know. But this is, at least for better or for worse, you may throw roses or eggs at me, but it is what I believe in, and hopefully, and it'll come out soon, April 26th.
You say, I need your lollipop. You say that you really have felt that you've been an outsider, and some of a sensibility that you have is that of being in between, and that's what you also try to capture in your films. Mm-hmm. So, how have you seen your in between? How have you rendered this notion of feeling an outsider, and why were you feeling an outsider? No, just generally, yes.
Well, I came from India I never left the country. When I was 18 and a half, I got a scholarship. People don't believe me, but I saw this movie called Love Story, and it looked very rich, where Ali McGraw and Ryan O'Neill were cavorting about in this place called Harvard. So I wrote to Harvard, and they happened to give me a full scholarship, which was quite unusual. And I got on a plane for not the first time a plane, but first time leaving my place, and came here. And it was astonishing to me that growing up in India, I think you might have had the same feeling in East Africa, but we were raised with a very much greater worldview than, say, my classmates from Indiana or somewhere else, because we came here. So I wasn't as culture shocked as many of my mates were from the rest of America, and I didn't really know about Harvard except really in these kind of ways. And my father let me come here because he said the Kennedys went here. So of course he couldn't refuse that. So it was something that, I was in that place. I never thought of myself as an immigrant. I never thought that I was coming to make my life here at all. But I would always be in the place of interpreting India in some fashion, to my friends or to my community here. And it was very not always enjoyable, because you'd feel like, who am I really speaking to? What is my audience? Do I have one at all? And when I would make documentary films, I first started making documentaries at MIT. I studied with Ricky Leacock and understood at the age of 20 that I was to make films. I was very happy to have found that place. But still, I made documentaries for about 7 years, and I would carry them under my arm and take Greyhound buses to places like this, to universities, to unions, to women's groups, and speak with my films, which were about India, And in those days, in the early 80s, there was not much about India. It was a very faraway place. There was no Bollywood that was known. There was nothing that people understood. So I would have very lonesome questions like, I saw running water in your movie. Do you really have running water in India? And I would say, I'll send my elephant to the airport to pick you up, and then you can understand. And they would really think that was not a joke, And I would play this game all the time, but in my heart it was pretty lonesome, because I would think, who will I ever speak to? Because at home in India, we never saw documentaries. It was only the big budget Bollywood escapist things. So my family denies this now, but they didn't see my movies until I made my first feature film, which was Salam Bombay. But so it was that seesaw, but I think that it really surprises me that I have an audience now, but the audience does build when you have a sensibility that you are faithful to yourself, perhaps, and you keep going with it. You find, I'll never forget when Mississippi Masala came out, which was in 1991, about an interracial love story, in part of an African American with an Asian woman who was actually African. It was about the Asian expulsion from Uganda and so on. But I remember going up to speak at a screening in London, and the lines were around the block, and there were like 3 blocks of hybrid couples, lining up to see this movie. And in the early 90s, it was not normal to see the brown skin and to see the black skin, literally, and certainly not in union on screen. So that was, slowly one has discovered that there is an audience for this kind of, perhaps, a voice.
So you also say that movement is something that you capture, that when you are a mover, you have more than one worldview. So how has your stay in Africa, you say you're a daughter of Africa, and then you've married a man who is thrice migrant back back in Uganda. Your father moved from Lahore to India. How have you rendered it artistically? I mean, the obvious one is namesake, but you see movement in Reluctant Fundamentalist as well.
You know, I guess one makes films of what one knows or feels, more importantly. And I think that, you know, this whole idea of ellipsis and looking out of your window in New York City and imagining the garden in Kampala is something I used to do. Now I'm in a different phase where I'm more rooted in actually my 3 homes and I run around. But when we were raising our son and before he went to college, we were living as New Yorkers do, you know, 8 months a year there, 4 months in Kampala. And it was always, I don't like to indulge in nostalgia because I think nostalgia is a fairly useless occupation, except that when you use it, you know, when you mine it and understand what it is doing, because I really believe that sanity and happiness perhaps can come from being fully engaged where you are, you know, and not about yearning and hankering. But of course, that is the state of the human heart. But I did feel that cinema does translate that seesaw, that dislocation, that imagining you're seeing the Hudson River but actually you're in your garden in a very potent way. And I love to read, but somehow images and music and the whole plasticity of the medium of cinema, what you can bring to it, can capture that state in a very powerful way. So somehow, I mean, I come to these movies for different reasons. The Namesake I came to from grief and loss and losing a parent in a country that was not her home. But that world, of course, as also given to me by Jhumpa Lahiri, was very interesting because the clue for The Namesake for me was how to film a city like it was both cities. You know, so the parallel of New York and Calcutta in The Namesake, it's very interesting. I grew up in Calcutta 12 years as a child, and I know it quite well. And the Howrah Bridge is a sort of iconic kind of metal sash across the Ganges River, and across the Hooghly, and so is, let's say, the George Washington Bridge or the Triborough Bridge in New York. So, and this is a couple that comes to New York. So I would always film it so that you did not know in which city you were. In a way, it's the state of mind of an immigrant, you know. So sometimes these things of being in between is the clue or the key to interpreting a certain kind of subject. With the Reluctant Fundamentalist, it's I guess, I don't know, it's really, again, this world of being being at home in America, deeply in New York City, in fact, and then, of course, being from another place. And not only that, but his job is a financial analyst, and he's sent all over the world, the young man, to shut down car factories in the Philippines or to go to Turkey to shut down publishing houses to make money for the man, kind of thing. And that, for me, was interesting, because the way people like us who are from other worlds, when we move to even other worlds, there's a certain kind of familiarity almost. You know, there's a certain kind of way of, at least I feel, a great humility, because I know that it's not, I don't know everything. That's what, and I go with that premise, and that is very, that makes me more permeable to that society. I have great respect for where I go. So that sucks me in even further, and that's Cengiz's reality in The Reluctant Fundamentalist.
So the other thing that it's very striking to me about your films, we were going to show a clip of from Monsoon Wedding. Yeah, it's okay. So what is so interesting is how powerful the women are in some of your films. I mean, Monsoon Wedding in particular, they're sexy, they're passionate, they are sexually expressive, and they're quite dominant, and they're smart. And the men are tender rather than the child abusers. You know, I mean, they could handle the fact that she'd had an affair with someone before, and the uncle who is very nice to the niece when he finds out. So where does that sensibility of powerful, sexy, assertive women come from? You know, I think, there was a very big survey done in England of schools, and Punjabi women were boisterous, smart, and even the bullies had to hang around in the corners. So, was it your mother, Indira Gandhi? Where does that sensibility come from?
Well, Punjabis are the party hard animals of India. And in addition to partying hard, we work equally hard, or so therefore the parties are that much more necessary. I mean, in fact, when I made the film on Cuba, Perez family, I felt so much in solidarity with the Cubans, with the Marielitos and the Cubans in Cuba, because it's the same deal. You know, we will never weep, we will laugh in the face of tragedy, even though you're suffering, but we will have a full good time, you know. So that, I love that spirit generally. So what in Kampala we call it lifeist, you know, the one who believes in life. And I come from that kind of as you do. And I mean, they say about the Punjabis that we will hug you before we know your name. And that's pretty much, you know, true. But well, you know, these are the women I like to belong to and that I come from, and I like to make movies of people that I want to hang with, you know. I don't want to make movies of things that feel like homework, and I certainly don't want to make movies where I don't love the characters, because it's really hard, you know, when you decide to make a film, you're living pretty much with 2 years of that environment, that habitat, that world, that character, you know. I always joke in my casting, when I'm casting people, because I cast a lot of movie stars, but I also cast a lot of unknown people who are just on a street that I happen to love, and they always ask me and tease me, and I say, you know, you have to look good enough for me to be happy with you for 2 years, you know. So it's like all about what I feel, you know, which is the privilege of it. But so these are the women that have always, you know, and men also in that ilk. But I did grow up in Orissa, this very small, unknown state in East India, and my mother is a professional social worker. She calls herself a professional beggar. She's someone who really believes in action. You know, she was married to my father, a civil servant. She was supposed to be in, you know, starched saris, playing cards every afternoon, and she did that to some extent. But then on the side, or not on the side, she sort of organized for the war with Pakistan. She organized, you know, soldiers, little bags that we would airlift down to soldiers full of cigarettes and bag blankets and whatever. So as a kid growing up, I was always surrounded by that kind of activism, you know. So the real question that used to propel me was whether art could change anything in the world, you know. And I would read biographies of amazing people that I loved and so on. And inevitably, if there were artists that I liked, like say Billie Holiday, I would despair that it all had to end in a haze of some sort of drugs or some sort of, you know, chaos in one's personal life, real despair. And I would wonder whether that was the way or what is the way, you know. And these were all fuel for my own inspiration, finding things I could do that could perhaps change or not, which is why I stopped being an actor. I started as an actor in political street theater in India, but I didn't feel like I could really have impact enough, you know. And then I came here, and the theater was, you know, Oklahoma and hoop skirts and musicals, and I didn't speak to me. But until my son was cast as Curly 20 years later, and then I woke up singing "Oh, What a Beautiful Morning" every day. But anyway, you know, so then I stumbled into documentary film, which gave me, I hoped, the chance. But with Salam Bombay, which was the film about street kids, where we worked with street kids, where we had a workshop with street kids, where we made this really phenomenal movie that then financed a foundation for street kids. And just a month ago, we celebrated the 25th anniversary of this movie. We reprinted it and put it all over India on the screens. But it was more than that, a 25th anniversary of the Street Kids Foundation. And so that's the only film that's really impacted actual society in a very genuine life-by-life type of way. But those were the early questions. And women have always, you know, growing up, you saw women on either side of Mahatma Gandhi fighting for freedom. You saw, you know, I remember Sushila Nair, this great minister of health under Nehru, came to see us once in this little town where we lived. And I was really impressed by the fact that we have public models of that nature. And that's the paradox of being in America, where the thought of a female president still gives you indigestion here, but it's just common at home. You know, it's like, that's the paradox. People think we come from a traditional place, and yeah, we do, but women have always been at the forefront in public places. So that gives you a kind of foolish confidence in a great sense of that anything is possible. You know,
I saw a monsoon wedding with some people here in Worcester, and they were stunned by the assertiveness, the sexiness, the sensuousness, and the passionateness of the women. And therefore I think it is, in terms of image making, you know, these are not subversive, sacrificing types, or they're not between two cultures, which was a dominant model that Grinda Chadha and my generation had to fight. And so I think that it's very interesting in that way. So one of the other things that I was very keen to find out was, you know, what have been your struggles where you had to fight to represent yourself on your own terms, and what was not a success? I mean, is there a film that you wish you had not done because you were not allowed to express the agenda that was very, very much your own?
Well, the film that really that really was difficult for me, very difficult for me, was Kama Sutra, which oddly a lot of people, you know, love, but I felt like burning every single print after I finished this film, because many reasons. I mean, firstly, as a wife and mother and all of these things, sometimes I'm forced to make, I concoct films because it'll work with my life in some way, and we start writing a story, then that becomes real, and that becomes more real, and suddenly I have the finance and I'm making the film. And that was one kind of trajectory. But Kama Sutra grew out of a reaction to the perversity of sexuality on our screens in India, where there was no such thing. A good woman was a self-sacrificing, devout mother who doesn't have any kind of beating heart, who's just there to be devoted to the family and so on. And a bad woman was a vamp who smoked a cigarette and had a glass of something and you know, cavorted about in a skimpy thing. And that there was ne'er the twain should meet, and you can't be one, you have to be one or the other. And because in those years in India, kissing was not allowed, lovemaking was not allowed on screen, everything that was shown as sexual on our screens, and God knows there was a lot of it, was in rape forms or perverse forms, really vulgar forms of denigrating women to the most base, you know, situation. And I wondered, how had this society come to these stereotypes from being a society in the 11th century on that had a very open and very matter-of-fact attitude towards sexual mores, towards social mores, towards the rules between men and women. So I went back to the Kama Sutra, which was a compilation of how-to, it's literally a how-to manual, not in the pop-up sexual way that everyone thinks it is, but in the real ways of how do you conduct yourself between men and women. Anyway, so we wrote a script that I thought did perhaps some justice to that world and that era. But it's very difficult to make an erotic film. It's very difficult to make a film in a country then like India, which was so, you know, like this is pornographic, it cannot be you know, we used to have all these ministers of parliament after us while I was shooting. They would come suddenly to our set, and we would have these dressing gowns that I would put over whatever the costumes were of the people. And anyway, it was just incredible sort of shenanigans to make this movie. But at the end, for whatever reason, the movie I felt was Kama Sutric in that it engaged all the senses. But it's very difficult to make, anyway, it didn't have the rust, the real essence of what I was trying to do. And so, even though it was a commercial success for all the right or wrong reasons, it was not the movie I had started to make, you know. And that's a lonely feeling for a director, you know, and that can easily happen because there's so many people involved in a film that it can end not being what you began with, you know. That was one such, you know, so that definitely I felt that way.
And also the fact that you cast men of color as male leads. I think that was also a struggle for you, was it not? when Denzel Washington, I think somebody told, investor told you very bluntly that he wanted a white person.
Right. Well, that's different. I thought you were asking about a movie that didn't satisfy, so I was answering that. But, well, yeah, I mean, with Salam Bombay was my first film, and it was a very big success, and so all Hollywood types wanted to talk to me about other films, and I had this idea of Mississippi Masala, which was born out of my own undergraduate years of being a brown person between black and white in our college, and I was so interesting that I felt accessible to both communities, and yet there were lines that I understood that couldn't be crossed, and so I wanted to make this the film, and then found about the Asian expulsion. I'd never been to the continent of Africa. I mean, I found out about the expulsion, about the Ugandans who had never known India or Asia in any way being suddenly expelled because of the color of their skin and so on. Anyway, so this was a romance between Denzel Washington, who had not become the huge star he is now, but he had won the Oscar. He was a decent, person, to a really good actor, and an unknown Indian woman, Sarita Chowdhury. And I went to this head of the studio, and he said, very good story, excellent, but can you make room for a white protagonist? And it's exactly his question, and I smiled at him and I said, I can promise you one thing, that all the waiters in this film will be white. and he laughed, and I laughed, and he showed me the door, and never, gave me a dime. And so it's interesting, when you get, there's some kind of strange juice that I get from being rejected. I get this kind of crazy feeling that I'm just going to show them, and it's a lonely kind of thing, but it does propel me. It gives me a kind of it still works with me. It didn't work so well with Reluctant, because we kept mounting this film with all these stars and so on, and it kept collapsing. It collapsed twice just before shooting, which is a hard nut to crack. And I remember, it was a life transition in my life. 2 years ago, my son had gone to college, my husband had gone to teach in Kampala, and I have this wonderful place in New York where we live in 3 generations, and suddenly it was just me and a very Siberian winter, and this movie that was supposed to have started and never started. And I really did feel like I almost should give up, because it is almost like in the yogic world you feel like something is conspiring against you for making this happen, and maybe I should listen to that. But this story is really a story of today. It really is a story for actually most of this crowd here. It's a story for the 20-somethings people, because we all grow up with thinking, what will we become? Where will we go? What is better for us to be at? Is the grass greener on that side? And who are we? What is the truth that we are given? And this film is about those questions, and really made for my 21-year-old son and his mates, and people who are in that journey of coming of age, like we say. It's a coming of age story, So I thought of, it's really that kept me going with it, and finally got to make it. And so it never gets any easier, I tell my students.
So what kind of a message do you feel that you'd like Western audiences to take away from that movie? Especially, Pakistan is not going anywhere from the headlines anytime soon. So, and did you struggle with that message, and how do you think that comes across in the movie?
Well, I made the film to create conversation, to create discussion. The film poses more questions than it does answers, and because the world is like that. But what it should do, and hopefully does, is really humanize what we don't think of, or a country or a people that we don't think of even as human. I mean, it has never been a dialogue, and I really. And the story, of course, gave me that premise, but also the love of both places as I have it, gave me the layers that I wanted to bring to it, because it's an unflinching film. It's not a simple film. It's a resolutely complicated film, because the world is so complicated now about, especially anything to do with Muslimhood, anything to do with a part of the world, or fundamentalism in any case, in any way. So that's what I hope to make you feel, is to explore the idea of who is the other, because it's enough already, and really there's so little that we ever see that makes us understand that on the other side there are weddings and deaths and births and traffic accidents and people who celebrate and die and live, just like we do anywhere, But you don't see that in a palpable way that you can see yourself in that person. Not that you're just being shown a person, but I want you to see yourself in that person. He happens to be Pakistani, that's fine, or not. But that's the idea, and that's, I think, the difference, I hope. Yeah.
I was going to ask, you've been a lot of places and met a lot of people and heard a lot of stories, and if you had one, just piece of advice or thing that you've learned through all of that you could share with us? I know that's a hard one. Yeah, generally.
Well, you said that the thing that made you, answering your question, whilst you think, that when somebody asked you what got you so far, it was that you were resolutely stubborn and had humility towards the world, that you didn't give up.
Yeah, well, I think that you should, the one thing I would say is to take courage with what you do know, and to be extremely direct about what you don't know, but to understand that your own place in the world is distinctive, and that you are not, this is my own philosophy, that you are not there to interpret for others in the way that you can interpret for yourself. And so I get a lot of courage from rejection. I get a lot of I get a lot of you have to have, this is the weird part, to make movies, because I happen to make them, to make movies, you have to have something, a self-belief, that you will let few break down. And that's an odd thing. We were talking earlier how filmmaking is a disease. Either I feel it's a disease. Either you have to be completely sick, or you will never, be able to make movies, because it is an affliction. It is so tough in that sense. So therefore, that belief, that self-belief, is kind of vital. But in order to make real work, I think that you have to be open to life. And what I fight against is insularity, is people who just live in a very small place. And that's one of the things, coming from where we all do, and actively, in my case, living in 3 continents. And it gives you, it's very interesting to go to a place where they don't understand box office. They don't know who Nicole Kidman is. My husband has no idea who Julia Roberts is. Once she came to kiss our baby when he was 2 months old, and he said, "Who's that?" And I love that, because it just doesn't matter. So one person's fame in one place is completely meaningless in another place, and that's very good. Because if you buy the whole thing wholesale, you're screwed. In the sense that then you want that, and that's not what I wanted. Otherwise, I would be in Los Angeles, and I probably would never come to a university.
There was ridiculous determination and humility to the world.
That's pretty true.
Okay, to do my professorial thing, one last question from somebody who wanted to speak, but just did not have the courage.
A man!
The Battle of Algiers.
Yeah.
I was wondering, is there a director, I'm sure, to be modest, is there a director that you could say has had a tremendous, very great impact on your life and an influence in your thinking and your career?
I came to take cinema seriously only when I came here. Because in India, growing up, there was only Dr. Zhivago playing every Sunday, where I lived. And I really seriously didn't know that movies could be taken seriously until I was 20, and I came here and looked at even Satyajit Ray in Science Center B, it was disgraceful but true. So I have a spotty cinematic education. I don't like one after the other study everything, but in different phases of my life, different directors, you know. So there's Satyajit Ray, of course, in the earliest work, which is so beautiful and was a big foundation of The Namesake, as well as Hrithik Ghatak, his counter rival and contemporary, amazing sort of Russian-inspired Bengali director, amazing director, Hrithik Ghatak. So in that, but then Emir Kusturica, this Serbian director who made When Father Was Away on Business or The Underground or these movies, he is just wild and amazing, you know. And oddly enough, Michael Mann in this country, I mean, Michael Mann's work is so, you know, he takes every technological sort of risk. He has unbelievable film rhythm. Unfortunately, the content of his work, I mean, The Insider is one of my greatest favorite films, but the content has since become, you know, Miami Vice and, you know, guns and Tom Cruise, not my thing. But always the way he shoots or the way he uses music or the way he does things, I always see his films, you know. But they don't last in me, but they teach me, you know. So there's not one person. It's a combination. It's sometimes a film that will. But I tell you, music is a very big fuel for me. Classical music, Indian classical music, Pakistani modern sound. I mean, music is. Without music, I don't know how to make a film in a funny way. It really inspires me. And photography. So I'm a great student of, you know, everyone from, you know, Eggleston to Arche to Cartier-Bresson to Dayanita Singh to, you know, lots of people. Like, seeing the world in a frame is almost more inspiring than a film for me. On that note, thank you very much.